Let's have a conversation about something that's been happening in the country for months now. And it appears to be a conversation that's fading away, and it must not fade away.
It seems to be one that has been absolutely forgotten. And let's take a look back a couple of months. April 2023, then we were met with a story of, bodies being found in a forest in what we now know very familiarly as Shakahola. The Shakahola forest, which is in Kilifi County, is in Makongeni sublocation. And we were told of, at first, 20 bodies having been found. And the number started rising significantly, albeit slowly, but it rose significantly. And by the end of April, 100 bodies had been found. By the end of May, that number had doubled. By the end of June and into July, that number that was found at the end of May had doubled in itself. Today, we are looking at a situation whereby 425 bodies have been found buried in Shakahola forest. Now, one of the painful facts about that is about 50% of this number are the bodies of children. Now, if we take a step back and look at what had happened, it was said that the leader of the Good News International Church in January had proclaimed to his congregations, which were now, quite strong in terms of number, that the world was going to come to an end come June 2023. And what he was telling his people is that they needed to fast, essentially starve, in order to meet Jesus in advance before the world came to an end. What would then happen is that people died from starvation. The office of the government pathologist, Johnson Odwar, has told us that while many people that they have been able to examine posthumously died from starvation, a number of them died from asphyxiation. So you want to ask the question, were they then taken to their death a lot faster than they would have naturally? We also see some individuals who were in this church who today have been charged as individuals linked to these crimes. And the Red Cross has stepped in to do a number of things. The Red Cross stepped in to lead the exhumation process. We are now at level 5 of that process. And what was found was several mass graves where the highest number of people buried in a grave at one point were 27. And many times we see that children were often lumped together. Of these numbers, we're also seeing now that 95 people had been rescued. 47 out of those 97 have been put in what is called the Sahajanad Rescue Center in Kilifi County. There are 3 processes that are currently going on. The exhumation process now at level 5 continues, but since that process began, we have not been told about the numbers that have been exhumed since then to add to this 425. Number 2, there is a legal stroke judicial process going on in the fact that Paul Mackenzie is still in custody. On the 10th of August, which now is the 9th of August, the state was given 47 more days to hold him for an investigation to continue. He actually made history as the man who had been in pre-charge custody for the longest time in Kenya. All right? He and other members of this church, many have called it a cult, many have called it, many other things, have been in custody waiting for the case. The other side of this process is that the state says they cannot continue with their investigations because the exhumation process is not complete. With the completion of that process, what would happen is that it would allow them to then present more evidence to what they were going to charge these individuals with. So in the meantime, the prayer was that this gentleman and his lieutenants remain in custody. What baffled people, and what some have said, is that there is a possibility that this cult continues to operate in secrecy because fresh graves were found even after the exhumation process had begun.
Found where?
Still in Shakahola. Now, when we say fresh graves, that means even after April, there were bodies that were being buried and they could tell from the examinations that they did the time period, testing the soil and all of this, the time period that when this individual had been buried. So the question is, who was burying these people even after supposedly this area had been cordoned off? It's been called by many as the biggest act of peacetime barbarism in Kenya since decolonization. Amnesty International said that. We've heard the CS Ministry of Interior, CS Kindiki, say that they would be charged with terrorism. They would be charged with acts of genocide, because whereas there is freedom of worship in the country, there is the hold to say that individuals' lives cannot be put at risk. There are many things happening at the same time. Number one, as you said, it's very possible that this has been forgotten. But my friends, 425 people buried is not a small number. People buried, that means they died, and there's no explanation or proper rhyme or reason for their death. Number two, the length of time that it is taking to cover this expanse of land. Yes, we realize 300 hectares is not your run-of-the-mill 300 kilometers. It is quite an expanse of land to cover. There is a waiting, there is a list. Now, this is where the numbers get a bit sticky, and it would be nice if we got a little bit more information in terms of what was going on. So we do know 425 people have been recovered from the grounds. Bodies that have been stored in the storage facility provided by the Kenya Red Cross.
Yeah.
We know that. And I'm going to go back on my numbers. Not 319, but 119 people have been positively identified. 119 have been positively identified. What we do not know is if this number has been taken off of that list of 613. So we cannot add and subtract based on that. We also know that from these numbers that we've been given, none of the bodies then have been removed from the storage center, because the state cannot release these bodies then for proper burial, because the majority of them have not been positively identified.
Okay.
So there are many things that are going on simultaneously. To cap all of that, there is a special task force that was appointed by the president to look into these issues. The chair, the Tana River Senator, Danson Mugatana, has told us that they needed more time to continue their investigations and gathering of information.
This is the Senate team,
yes.
the Senate committee.
Yes.
Investigating this.
But they are, yes, but they
created by the Senate.
Yes, but they are a task force, right? And they've said they need a little bit more time, and they've asked Kenyans to be patient. So we come to the social aspects, and you want to ask yourself, what is the value of life? That something like this, so great in terms of a tragedy, can happen, and we seem to forget it as though it didn't matter, or that it actually didn't happen within the boundaries of the geography of Kenya. That there are people whose wives and children, whose husbands and children, whose sisters and children, whose daughters, whose sons disappeared. And then there's a possibility that they starved to death and then they were buried. So one must ask the question, what value do we place? How is it possible that under the leadership of one man and his lieutenants, you have 425 people buried? And at best, in some cases, we are dithering about what exactly happened to them and what is going to happen in the future.
Okay. So there was a team that was constituted to look at the religious organizations and the modalities, whether or not to regulate religious organizations. Mutava Musyimi and team are meeting. There is the Senate hearing, the Senate investigation that's going on, led by Katana. There was an attempt by the president to institute a judicial inquiry, which was blocked in court by the opposition Azimio. There is Kithure Kindiki, the cabinet secretary for Interior and National Administration, who's in charge of this whole operation, who's overseeing it, who has said, you know, it's a delicate operation, it's taking time. There are relatives of some 613 people who've been reported missing and who are likely, according to those who are on the ground, to be among those who disappeared in this vast piece of land. 425 bodies, you said, have been exhumed. These are very many people. But what really bothers me is that it's April, May, June, July, August, September, into October, and we do not have an end in sight to the conclusion of this operation. We have called it phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's as if it's a real estate development. It's as if we said, as if we said, you know what, we're going to build some affordable housing program in Shakahola. We are in phase 1, units are completed, owners can come and start occupying. We've moved to phase 2. Now we're in phase 5, construction, where phase 1, 2, and 3 are, I know, being sold and owners are coming in. This is not real estate development.
And now here we are.
This is a disaster. This is a disaster where you've actually identified that something happened and people were being buried here. You know very well that the longer those bodies remain underground, the faster they continue decomposing. So the chances of actually finding out what happened to these people diminishes. Johansen Odor keeps saying some of these bodies I've been able to do post-mortem, others I haven't, because of the level of decomposition on this.
Decomposition beyond possibility of identification.
Yes. So there are all these things that are taking place. My question, and always what keeps bothering me, is why is this taking so long? If we just say that these 613 people that were reported missing are actually those that were buried there, 613 people, it's taking us 6 months to exhume 613 bodies in a vast piece of land. What if a natural disaster like the one that has happened in Libya happened in Kenya? What if a natural disaster like a major earthquake that...
whereby you had to locate bodies?
Where you are, yes. Are you saying that we shall not be able to actually recover bodies if an earthquake happened in Kenya and bodies were flattened and we have more than 1,000 people missing? It'll take us 2 years to recover bodies.
That is what we are saying.
In fact,
we are not actually even removing rubble. We are just going into land that's flat and exhuming and identifying. This looks like a fresh ground. This looks like a grave. Let's dig up. Let's exhume bodies. It is like that. But it's taking us 6 months. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5. Why are these phases? The
initial problem was that the Red Cross, of course, operating in the capacity which they do, of course, they did not have enough in terms of personnel, which is understood. But, of course, then we would ask the question, well, Kenya, government, Kenya has personnel. You do.
Personnel to do what?
To exhume. Now, mind you...
What is exhume?
Hold on. Mind you, the Kenya Red Cross also said that the volunteers who are helping in the exhumation are not necessarily people who have been trained in these forensics. It's really people who are able to be shown in a few minutes. And we have that. We have that. Who could be shown in a few minutes, dig here and dig in this manner. And it doesn't take long for you to figure that out. So what are we saying? That it is very possible to get other people on board as well. That if the terrain looks like this, dig in this manner. And Red Cross has told us today that they know from this that they've also then been able to train other people on the job to be able to deal with disaster management. So the question is then why? If it is so easy then to train, why do we not then have more people who can be on ground serving as volunteers to help out in this manner? It's not for want of people. The Red Cross has established that you can actually do that in minutes and show people what to do and then continue a supervisory role. Why is it taking so long? 300 hectares, we understand. Very, very large expanse of land. However, the question is, why is this taking so long? Just the other day, the Red Cross also decided that they were going to expand this freezer storage capacity. So what does that tell you? That they're finding more bodies. Are they telling us the numbers that they're finding? No. And that scares me a little bit because... how many more have we found? And why is that information not being made public?
Okay. If you want to understand exactly where we stand, and our reference point being the government, its policy, and the mindset that more or less the very thing we're discussing is anchored on, let me just read what we call the Kenya National Policy on Disaster Management. It aims at, I'm reading. It aims at establishment and strengthening of disaster management institutions, partnerships, networks, and mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in the development process in Kenya to strengthen the resilience of vulnerable groups to cope with potential dangers. Now, have you understood what I've just said?
No.
No.
All right, let me read. Let me further, then I'll go to, I'll circle back.
Okay.
The plan seeks to build upon, streamlining and strengthening the already existing structures, coordination structures in Kenya. Okay? The plan recognizes the use of internationally recognized tools and procedures in disaster responses. It recognizes, okay? The plan builds upon the humanitarian code of conduct and charter and the sphere standards. Okay, once again, have you understood what I've just read?
No.
Well, neither did I. I'm reading it so that we understand that if you have a policy and you even have a directorate that's supposed to deal with such matters, but the thinking behind it is as vague as what happens when it comes to operationalizing it. So what then do you think happens when disaster occurs? This disaster is horrific in nature because of the manner in which very many people lost their lives. But are we saying that year in, year out, we don't have disasters in this country? I mean, we count them every day. Whether it is mudslides, whether it is people who are being washed away from a bridge that should have been fixed, God knows, 20 years ago. Okay?
Buildings collapsing.
Collapsing every so often. These are all disasters.
Mines collapsing. There's a current ongoing issue now in Kakamega County. A gold mine has collapsed.
Yes. In fact, the alarm bells should ring when one life is lost in a disaster.
Yeah.
It didn't ring. We saw in Siaya when people were mining for gold and whatever, the mine collapsed, and we saw the debacle. We saw somebody, you could hear him, you couldn't get him out. The disaster process, the disaster management process itself was a disaster. Okay? So now, let's come to something like this. We've been talking about Shakahola for the longest time, but even as we've talked about Shakahola, we have impending danger that is upon us. It's called El Nino. The mindset is being operationalized and you can see it. You talk about it. Maybe for the optics, the governor of Nairobi puts across some show of people with wheelbarrows and shovels, and that's just about it really. And here we are. Right across the country, people who live by the lake, whenever there were inflows or whether there were floods, we know what happens. What you hear the media talking about is the dangers that are coming and what needs to be done. The media talks about it very loudly. And then you wait for the response. And that seems to be the never-ending position. We are waiting for a response that will bring these matters to a conclusion. We know the areas that are prone for mudslides, flooding. We know. El Nino has been here before. We know what will happen. Now, this just highlights the state of mind that we have when it comes to managing matters that are dear to the hearts of the people. Something like a disaster, because this was a monumental disaster. Even as we got to the point where before we got to these numbers, the warning signs were always there, but how was it treated? So again, here we are. So how big a disaster do we need to see happening for us to understand that we must actually take this matter of disaster management seriously?
You know, there are two things here. There is one, and it is a very clear one issue of disaster management, disaster preparedness, and how to go about it.
Yes.
There's the other one of attaching value to life. Okay? For me, Shakahola is not an ongoing disaster. It happened by the time Kithure Kindiki was kicking everybody out and saying, all right, so we are cordoning off this area. And it becomes a public issue and it's a public security issue. I think by that time, this thing has ended. And even if it's continuing, it is minute. And if it's continuing, then security agencies have a lot to answer. But since then, this is vast land, fine. But it's an inhabited land. You're not dealing with populations where you're saying, okay, so, you know, guys, in this village, we need to move you so that we can come in and now start exhuming. No, there's nobody living here.
It's open expanse.
It is flat land. It is not rocky, or it's mountainous, it is rugged terrain, it is all these things. It's just none of those things. Why are we into the 7th month of exhumation? Exhumation. We are not talking about the 7th month since, we finished exhuming, we identified the bodies. There were those that were beyond recognition. There were those that were unable to be identified. We allowed the families to go and bury because we did the records. Now we are dealing with this 7 months before we commence prosecution of those that we think are culpable. No, we are talking about 7 months of ongoing exhumations. I
that
don't
exhumations
get it.
have stalled so that you can move and then you can start the process of identification. And then you come back.
When you're exhuming, you cannot conduct post-mortem.
Those things
when you're conducting
post-mortem,
post-mortem, you cannot exhume.
No.
And those things are not happening in the same ground.
No.
I don't get it.
I know there's an entire ministry that's supposed to deal with such things. Forget the health ministry that's dealing with it now. The Ministry of State for Special Programs in the Office of the President, this is their docket.
No, I'm sorry.
This is
But
interior national coordination.
Yeah. Do you know what you're saying with this? What you're saying is, okay, it's possible that 500, 600 people died and are buried in a forest in Kenya, and it's okay.
We'll take our time.
We'll take our time and we will deal with it as we can. And that's okay.
Yes.
That you who want to bury your loved ones, guess what? You wait until we finish. The people who may have been responsible for this by asking people to starve themselves to death, all right, we'll deal with them as and when we can.
Let's keep holding them.
But let's just hold them until God knows when. That the children who starved and died through no desire of their own, what you're basically saying is that really doesn't matter. So you know what we'll do? As we can do it, we will. We're not going to beef up the office of the government pathologist. We're not going to bring in more volunteers and train them about how to do this. We're just going to let the Red Cross continue with the heavy responsibility that's on their shoulders and let them just continue. And when we can, we will let you know that we finished. More than that, we're going to shut out the media. And we're not going to let you come in here and then report to people on a regular basis in terms of what is happening. So you know what? When we are ready, when we finish, and then we'll have a task force who tells you, just give us some more time, guys. And this incidentally happened when they were launching a Bible. And they said, you know what? This is important because if people read the Bible, we would not have extremist groups like this, where 425 people then are buried.
Who said that?
Danson Mgatana. So my question is,
how
seriously do we place value on life? If it was one Kenyan, if it's 425, the 613 that are missing, who have been linked to what is happening in Shakahola, what answer do we give? What answer do we give? And it is not okay. Somebody asked me again, it's a question that keeps coming up, why are you so upset? And I said, why aren't you? You should be. You should be.
Do you know, if you're looking for a testimony of how it is our government treats its citizens, here it is.
This is it. There are at least hundreds of families that have said our loved ones, we think, came to Shakahola. We haven't seen them. It's probable that they died. All right? Those loved ones are seeing reports of bodies being exhumed. Those loved ones are seeing reports of bodies that have been identified, 119 of them. Those loved ones are seeing a continuation of the exhumation, slow exhumation process. The government is extenuating their trauma. Those people are traumatized. Those people every day think, what happened to our so-and-so? What happened to my daughter, to my son? What happened to my uncle, to my auntie? What happened to my mother,
my wife
father,
and my 6
to my
children?
Wife? What happened to them? They don't have answers. They cannot even start having answers to those questions. They will wait until the day when Kithure Kindiki finishes this I will finish one day. Just we are on phase 5. We don't know how many stages are we going to have.
I don't even know how many
7, 10. We're on phase 5 now. So how many more phases to go? No answer being given at all. And we shouldn't even be asking this. They should be proactively saying, this is what we've done so far, and this is how long it will take us. And this is how we are managing those that have come. This is how we are managing the rest of the public, because there are people in the public who may not even have a relative here, but they're traumatized by just thinking, what is this that has happened in Shakahola? There are people who are traumatized by it. How are we dealing with that? The government does not care. We already know that more than 600 people have been reported missing by their relatives. And Red Cross and government officials who are listening and hearing and recording these reports of the missing persons have identified that it's possible that these 613 people at least are likely to have ended up in Shakahola somehow. Maybe they got in and got out. They haven't been in touch with their families. Maybe they got in, they didn't get out. They're buried in the ground. But what's happening? What's going on? Where is the government?
What's going on? Let me bring it home a little bit. There's a gentleman who left Bungoma County in April at the thought of this, because in 2021, his wife and his 6 children left him and said that they were going to pursue the way of the Lord. Okay? Now, when he started hearing the stories of this thing, the man said, it's possible that this is where my family is. This gentleman has been in Makongeni since April and has not left, waiting for the day when they will tell him, we've been able to identify so-and-so. He has given the names. The names are on that list of the 613 of his 6 children and his wife. And they have told him it's possible that they are here based on everything that you have told us. Because his wife did not hide the information. She told him that they were going to Kilifi. She did. So now the man has been waiting for 7 months to find out the fate. He just wants to know if they're dead. Just tell me so that I can know. Now take that number of this man and multiply it as many times as you wish. Because that is the truth of the situation. Now, as if things could not get any worse.
Where is this man staying? Somewhere in Kilifi.
Yes.
Who's paying his rent? Who's feeding him?
Now, the details of that in terms of what has happened, we do not know. But he's just been there waiting that he will wake up one day and they'll say, actually, from the identification process, we have found your people, or this is who they are. Okay? Sad situation. The questions are, what's happening from a legal point of view? And they've told us, actually, you know what? We got to hold them a little bit more. We have to hold these suspects a little bit more. What are some of the horror stories that we've heard that are coming from this Janad Rescue Center, where 95 of the people who are still found, mind you, there are people who are still found in the forest, others starving, waiting if this was a day that they will go to heaven. And they were rescued and essentially force-fed, taken to hospital, force-fed, and then now brought, because out of that 97, out of that 95, 47 of them are said to be suspects. So what did they start to do? That number one, they said, now what are they supposed to do? Then started relating amongst themselves. Some cesspool of some crime incest that I don't even know what you want to call it. And that was happening at the rescue center. And it became an issue of news. The rights of Paul Mackenzie have also come into question. That can he actually be held for so long without a charge, without the results of investigation coming to the fore? And then the greater question that we want to ask here, when we talk about religious extremism, and yes, Kenyans have a right, a freedom to worship, etc., are there proper checks and balances to make sure that things like this are not happening? Because you say, yes, every human has a right, but look at children. At what point? Because you guys, 50% of the numbers that we have seen coming out of that 425 are children who could not give their consent as to, okay, I want to fast and go to heaven. That they did it under the authority of their parents or under the authority of the church who said, go. Now imagine a situation where you have a starving child. And Johansson Oduor's office also told us that children, their dying breath was as a result of asphyxiation. What does that mean? That they were already on the way, and others, they were strangled. Force trauma. And others had, so you killed them. You made sure they went on top of the starvation that they were already suffering. Children who have no right to give consent because they are minors. Number two, have no idea what is even going on. And you know what we say? Every day that this is delayed, every inaction that is taken, every time you say, give us a little bit more time, you know what you're saying? You're endorsing this act. You are saying that it is okay that 400 plus people have been found buried and it's possible that another 600 are underground. You're saying it's all right and we'll deal with it at some point. And I'm saying you cannot.
I refuse to accept Unless I get a really good explanation, I refuse to accept that it actually should take 7 months to exhume bodies. There's nothing at all that explains to me why we are taking 7 months, why we're doing this in phases. Okay, so yeah, it's a delicate operation. Yeah, there's this and the other. But surely, why is it taking 7 months? Kithure Kindiki, the CS, has on many occasions come out to say, so this is what is happening in Shakahola. We're going to spend more time. When it comes to talking tough on Mackenzie and the others, he says these ones are going to be treated like the biggest criminals. These are war crimes and
genocide.
And genocide. But there is no sufficient explanation that's given on why it's taking this long. There are very many things that are happening. When it's taking this long, you're extending that trauma that we've talked about. Number two, it's also costing. It's a cost. It's a cost that's being incurred by government on a daily basis as long as this operation is going on. Why is it taking more than 7 months to exhume bodies? Why has it taken 6 months to exhume 400 bodies and we're still spending more time? You already know this is the area. We are not looking for the bodies in a province.
Hey.
It is within a certain area that the government has come and said, we have cordoned off this area, we are doing an operation inside this land. Why is it taking so long? Is it government incompetence, incapacity? None of those make sense to me.
My dear, the problem is that you're not going to get an answer in terms of why it's taking so long. And that's the unfortunate thing. That you will not be told that it is because of 1, 2, 3, and this is the reason why it's taking so long. We've seen, if you want something to happen quickly, we've seen that it can happen. And this is my problem. If you actually want to place something on your priority list, nobody has to tell you twice. You don't have to wake up tomorrow morning and say, okay, this is the thing on the agenda. No, it'll be very clear to you the importance that somebody has placed on something by the action that they take. And that's why I keep saying the value that we place on human life is close to non-existent. If we did, things like this would not happen.
It's an attitude.
It is.
It appears to be an attitude. You know what? These people wanted to die anyway. So,
yeah.
So
who told them to go and starve?
Even, those, they are dead. They are buried. So however they ended up, those ones are dead. Their relatives, the rest of the country did not want to die.
So they didn't go.
But you are holding us into that same story, all of us, and you're telling us, you know what, guys, there's something that happened. We will tell you. So I refuse to accept that there's a tangible explanation.
I have to ask this question. So then what would you say we hold dear? What then would we say is important to the government? Because the government is the people, essentially. Mm-hmm. So if the people are not important, or are we saying we are an animal farm where some people are more equal than others?
Yes.
What are we saying? Mm. The measure and the value that is placed on human life can be an academic subject, but in this country, we don't need to theorize it. We just need to open our eyes and see. If we have situations where there is hardly anything we don't talk about in this country, and we talk about it at great length, and even when we mention things that are of concern, it appears as though when there is silence on the part of the government, then that matter is concluded.
Yeah.
So one asks, let's just start. The disaster-prone areas, disaster where there was conflict, people died. There were people we refer to as cattle rustlers. Mm-hmm. Then we had terrorism, attacks, people dying. All these things boil down to security. What we have in the news is every once in a while there is some device on the road that explodes, either killing the people who planted it or damaging some government vehicle. Are we ever given a complete report? Have we been told of what happened to the people we refer to as cattle rustlers and bandits? Have we been given a conclusive report? I haven't seen it.
Nope.
Maybe the two of you have.
I haven't.
Yes.
There's an ongoing operation that was announced by the government.
That we
which also got military involved.
Yes.
And they're supposed to be giving reports.
Yes.
And the same Ministry for Interior has said, you know what, we have pacified this area.
Yes.
And the people who are responsible, we already have dealt with them. Have you seen any of them being presented in court?
Not one, not a single one. So one doesn't really know, and we never get to even hear of the casualties as such, and yet there are casualties.
Mm-hmm.
There are casualties. Yes, they always are. Remember, these bandits, as we call them, are armed, and they take their work seriously. Huh? Now, where does that place us? Does it then give you confidence that you are safe within the ambit of this particular government and within the security forces that this government provides? How is it that when we had the Mtongwe ferry disaster, the people who rushed to that scene were not just the Kenya Navy, but private contractors, people whose work was to DiveCon and others, people who are professionals. This is something Kenyans do very well. They rally around.
Yep.
Now, are you telling me, in this matter, delicate as it is, you are telling me that the armed forces who have personnel, and they've been brought on many occasions to help out, could not have helped in this, because we have large numbers of them.
Or cannot today?
Yes, and if you say they need what? Medical personnel, they have medical personnel. If there are people who are specialized in dealing with delicate situations, it's such people. Why were they not brought in? They have not been known to refuse to assist where there's such a huge humanitarian cry for help.
Or is it that? Is it actually because it would be seen as though these individuals who were buried, these people who died and buried, the cause of their death was a personal choice?
It doesn't matter.
This is the thing, that warped as that reasoning may seem, I am looking for something. You have to help me out here. I'm grasping for straws because it doesn't make sense to me. So I am looking for a reason as to why there is not much in terms of, speed when it comes to this, or even recognition.
So let's just assume, let's take that and say there's an attitude issue here, all right? And the attitude of those that are in leadership in government is these people chose to die, all right? So
we'll figure it out later.
They chose to die, okay? But then there's a cost associated with it. The cost is X number of police officers are deployed right now into that one piece of land where they could be deployed elsewhere. The cost is X number of Red Cross personnel are deployed here where they could be deployed elsewhere. The cost is this Mackenzie and his other people who are in custody are occupying space. Are being fed by... This is...
Ironically. Yes.
All these things are a cost. So even if... And then the people whose relatives went missing and who are believed to have been among those that died in Shakahola are traumatized and they're looking for their loved ones. If for nothing else, do it for the families that want closure. These families that just want... You always hear this thing, tafadhali munipatie tu mtu wangu nikamzike.
Yeah, that's it.
Munipatie mtu wangu This is what people are looking for. I just want that closure. I want to perform the burial rites for my loved one. I know, I found out, so this is where they died. All right, give me the body, let me go and bury. Whenever we have all these disasters, air crashes and all, this is what people ask for.
This is what they ask for.
So are you able to give me back the body? If you're not, and you've told me that you have not been able to find that body, but you know that this person was on that plane, it's all right. Let me go and find a way of conducting the final rites for my relative. Some
kind of symbol.
You are telling this 600 people, let's reduce the number of families and say, okay, so some 500 families or so are looking for their 613 people. So let's say that. 500 people, you're telling them, you wait.
Even at, look, can you imagine the horror? Imagine the horror, because there are some who have been identified.
Yes,
okay?
119.
They have been identified and they've been able to say, this is your person.
Your person is here.
Family X, your person is here. Still, the bodies cannot be released to these families because they're saying we have not concluded the length of this investigation.
Something is
so we cannot release the bodies to you even.
Something is
so really, go back.
Something is very
bust my brain.
Something is very, very wrong here, because I'm sitting here trying to figure out which way up, which way across, which way down, which way. it's like we hear words, we see events, there's some attempt at coordinating these, but they can't be coordinated. And you're thinking, okay, so what really are we dealing with here? Bold, strong statements, and yet when we look, what you're seeing is issues that have no closure. And it's not one, it's not two, it's not three. And they seem to be piling. You know, when one says that, let's be specific now with ministries and say, leadership in this ministry don't seem to know what they're doing, or they don't have the capacity. Would one be speaking ill of people when in fact one doesn't understand the situation? Or would one be speaking from a position of accuracy? Because what would competence and the ability to grasp the wherewithal of the task before you, how would it play out?
City, even if it was just at the barest minimum sharing of information.
Yeah.
Even if it was that alone. Okay, let's even say, let's excuse you because these things take time, you don't have. Even if it was information sharing. Reduce that. Even if it was information giving to the people who you have identified before we graduate this thing. And that's a problem. It is a problem. Until we come to terms, we come to grips with this bad manner behavior that just escalates time and time again.
It is wrong.
It's wrong.
When we were talking about having this conversation this morning, one of the things that, was crossing around our conversation was, should we bring somebody to answer these questions? But then if you think about it, we don't have to be bringing somebody to answer questions that they have not proactively even gone out to start explaining.
Well,
the responsibility of those in office is to proactively explain. When we had that, in the middle of the COVID lockdowns and all, the Ministry of Health was having daily updates.
Daily.
Until
This is what we are doing. This is
Kenyan.
why we cannot reopen today, because we've had.
Daily.
So we are going to extend the lockdown. This is why you cannot go and eat at your favorite eatables. This is all those things we're being told by fellow Kenyan. This is why we should be hearing regular updates from Professor Kithure Kindiki or his PS Raymond Molo or others on why it's taking us 7 months of this operation. We should not be asking. We should not be, grasping and then
saying,
wondering.
what is happening?
Or maybe,
I think this is happening.
Maybe it's a delicate. So even if you come and tell us it's a delicate, explain to us what is this delicate thing. What's so delicate about Kenyans dig up graves every day? There's a funeral somewhere today. The grave has been dug up by Kenyans.
And many grave diggers are locals, and
there are many exhumations that happen, court-mandated exhumations. Who conducts those things? Villagers just go and they dig and they bring out the body. These things happen. So it's not that we are lacking people who can dig a grave. No. It's not like we do not know where, we know where. It's not like if it's shortage of these spaces where you can store the bodies, surely 8 months, if we are even ordering maize dryers and they're coming in time for harvest, we could have ordered more coolers. And they'll be here to contain the bodies. No. Ministry of Interior, no. Absolutely no. It should not continue more than 7 months of something that we don't know whether it will end, whether it will not end, or we are saying, let this Mackenzie guy still stay in custody. We shall start. No. This operation must come to an end.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.